Family ghosted me after a horrible injury. After recovering, the first they asked was to babysit. So I'm 23F, and up until recently, I was super close with my family. Like, I'm talking about spending almost all my free time with them. I have two sisters, Leah, 30F, and Sophie, 28F, and a brother, Adam, 35M. They all have kids, four total between the three of them, and for the longest time, I was basically their favorite aunt slash babysitter. I loved their kids, though. Don't get me wrong, I genuinely did. And honestly, I didn't really mind helping out. I didn't have a social life or anything. So when my siblings needed me to take care of the kids, I was all in. It felt like I had a purpose, you know? Looking back now, I think I ignored the fact that I was kind of their go-to person for everything when it came to their kids. It's like every weekend I was watching them or spending money I didn't really have to take them out somewhere fun. My siblings, by the way, all have way more money than I do. Like, they're all pretty well off, especially Adam. He's got this fancy job and all that, but somehow I was the one always footing the bill for the kids' toys, snacks, trips to the movies, you name it. At the time, it didn't bother me. I thought I was just being a good aunt. But now that I think about it, was I being a good aunt? Or was I just letting myself get taken advantage of? Anyway, things were going fine for years. I was babysitting all the time, going to their school events, taking them out on weekends so my siblings could have their own time off. I didn't have much else going on, to be honest, so it filled that gap in my life. I didn't have a big friend group, wasn't dating anyone seriously, so the kids were kind of my world. But then, everything changed about a year ago. I had this freak accident. I tripped over something stupid in my apartment. I think it was a laundry basket or something. And I ended up really hurting myself. Like, bad. I couldn't walk, and both my hands were messed up. Doctor said I was looking at 6 months, maybe more, of physical therapy and recovery. I went from being this super active, independent person to someone who couldn't even feed themselves. The first couple of weeks after the accident, I was still kind of in shock. I couldn't believe this was happening to me. But I figured, okay, my family is going to help me out, right? I mean, I was always there for them, always stepping up when they needed me. Now it was my turn to lean on them a bit. Boy, was I wrong. I was in the hospital for a couple of days after the accident, and I remember Leah came to visit me once. She stayed for like 20 minutes, and that was it. Adam? He texted me like, "Hey, heard you fell. Sucks, get well soon." Sophie didn't even show up at all, just sent a group text saying she was too busy with work but hoped I was okay. That's when the first red flag started waving in my brain, but I tried to brush it off, thinking they were probably just stressed or busy or something. I mean, they've got kids, jobs, lives. I didn't want to be that person who expected too much from them, right? Then I got sent home, and let me tell you, I've never felt so alone in my life. You ever try living by yourself when you can't even walk to the bathroom? Yeah, it's not fun. I couldn't cook, I couldn't clean, hell, I couldn't even brush my own hair. I had to cut most of it off because I just couldn't manage it anymore. I lost 30 pounds in those first few months because I couldn't even make myself food. The fridge was empty. I was living off crackers and protein shakes, and I was too embarrassed to ask anyone for help. And that's when I realized no one in my family was offering to help either. Before my injury, my phone would be blowing up with texts from my siblings asking if I could babysit, pick the kids up from school, or do something for them. After the accident, radio silence. Not one call to see how I was doing. Not one offer to come over and bring me groceries or just check in. It was like I didn't exist anymore. I had to rely on my next-door neighbor, Nancy, who I barely even knew, to pick up some food for me a couple of times. This woman who didn't know me from Adam was showing more kindness than my own family. It was around the third month of being stuck in my apartment, unable to do much of anything, that it really hit me. They only cared about me when I was useful. When I could watch their kids or do favors for them, I was the best sister, the best aunt. But now that I needed help, crickets. That realization messed me up more than the accident did, honestly. I'd always thought we were a close family, but the second I couldn't be their free babysitter anymore, they didn't even bother checking in. I started to feel more and more angry as time went on. I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt at first, like maybe they were just busy or stressed or something, but after months of nothing, it was pretty clear where I stood with them. There were days where I just sat in bed, staring at my phone, hoping one of them would call, maybe just to ask if I needed anything or to see if I was okay, but they never did. And it wasn't just the physical pain that hurt, it was the emotional pain of realizing that I wasn't as important to them as I thought I was. All those years of me going above and beyond for their kids, spending my weekends and money, thinking I was building this strong bond with my family, it all just felt like a lie. By the time I started recovering and was able to walk again, I was mad, really mad. I started thinking back to all the times they'd called me up, asking me to watch the kids so they could go on a date night or take a break, and I realized they never offered me that same kind of support. Not once. It was like they just saw me as their built-in babysitter, and the second I couldn't fill that role anymore, I was useless to them. So, after everything that happened with my accident, you'd think my family would have realized how much they'd messed up, right? Like maybe they'd notice how distant I was being and at least try to make things better. But no, nothing like that. They were still acting like everything was totally normal, like I hadn't just gone through one of the hardest times of my life without them. After I started to get back on my feet, physically at least, I was still dealing with a lot mentally. I had all this anger just boiling up inside me. I didn't know how to bring it up without starting a huge fight, so I kind of just waited to see what would happen. But one thing I knew for sure, I wasn't going back to being their personal babysitter. That part of my life was over. Then one day, I get this call from Sophie, the middle sister. She's all casual, like, "Hey, the kids really miss you. Do you think you could take them for the weekend?" I swear I almost threw my phone across the room. After everything, the first time I hear from her is because she needs me to watch her kids? Not even a, "How are you feeling?" or, "We haven't seen you in a while. Are you okay?" Just straight to asking for a favor. Like, "Are you serious right now?" So I told her flat out no. I'm not babysitting anymore, at least not for a while. I figured that was the easiest way to start setting some boundaries, you know? I didn't want to dive into the whole "I'm mad because you abandoned me" conversation just yet, but I needed to make it clear things had changed. Sophie didn't take it well. She acted all confused, like she couldn't understand why I was saying no. She even tried to guilt trip me by saying how much the kids missed me and how hard things had been for her lately. Now, normally that would have worked. I used to be a total pushover when it came to them, especially the kids. But not this time. I stood my ground and told her that I needed to focus on myself for a while. She got all huffy and was like, "Well, I just didn't realize you were so busy now." Busy? I'd been recovering from a life-changing injury for months, completely alone, and now I'm too busy for her? That phone call pretty much confirmed everything I'd been feeling. They didn't care about me unless I was useful to them. After that, I decided I needed to have a real conversation with all of them. Like, sit them down and just lay it all out. I wasn't going to keep pretending like things were okay when I was still hurting, both physically and emotionally. So I texted Leah, Sophie, and Adam, asking if we could all meet up for lunch at this cafe we used to go to. I thought it'd be a good neutral spot to talk things out. When the day finally came, I was nervous as hell. I didn't know how they were going to react, but I knew I couldn't just keep all of this bottled up anymore. So we all sat down, and at first, it was just small talk. They were laughing, catching up, acting like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, I was sitting there, trying not to explode. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and I just said, "We need to talk." That's when things got awkward real fast. I told them how hurt I was that none of them had been there for me during my injury, how they completely disappeared when I needed them most. I didn't hold back. I told them how lonely and abandoned I felt, and how it made me realize they only seemed to care about me when I was useful to them. I was shaking while I said all of this, but it felt good to finally get it out. Leah was the first one to speak, and her response made me want to scream. She said, "Well, you never asked for help. We just assumed you were fine." I was stunned. Like, did they really need me to beg for help? I couldn't walk. I couldn't even cook for myself, and they knew that. It wasn't a secret. I said, "Why would I have to ask? You saw me in the hospital. You knew I couldn't even get out of bed." Then Adam chimed in, all defensive. He said, "We all have our own lives, you know. It's not like we were just sitting around doing nothing." And that's when I lost it. I told them I had spent years putting their lives and their kids ahead of my own. I gave up my weekends, my money, my energy to be there for them, and the one time I needed something in return, they couldn't even bother to call. I told them I wasn't going to be their free babysitter anymore, and that from now on, I was setting boundaries. Leah looked pissed. She was like, "So you're just going to cut us off? You're going to punish the kids because we didn't check in enough?" That's when the guilt tripping really started. They kept bringing up the kids, saying how much they missed me, and how they didn't understand why I wasn't around anymore. But I wasn't going to let them guilt me into going back to the way things were. I told them straight up, "This isn't about the kids. This is about you guys treating me like I don't matter unless I'm doing something for you." And that's when Sophie finally spoke up. She tried to play the peacekeeper, saying, "We're sorry if we made you feel that way, but you didn't tell us how bad things were." I couldn't believe it. They were still making it sound like this was somehow my fault for not spelling it out for them. I just sat there shaking my head. I shouldn't have to beg my own family to care about me. At that point, I realized this conversation wasn't going anywhere. They weren't going to see things from my perspective, and they definitely weren't going to apologize or admit they were wrong. So I got up and left. As I walked out of that cafe, I felt this weird mix of anger and relief. I was pissed that they still didn't get it, but I was also relieved that I'd finally said everything I'd been holding in. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was putting myself first. And honestly, it felt good. After that conversation at the cafe, things between me and my siblings just went downhill. I mean, it was already bad, but now it was like we were all on totally different planets. No one was willing to see my side of things, and I sure as hell wasn't about to back down. For the first time in my life, I was standing up for myself, and I wasn't going to let them guilt trip me into going back to being their personal babysitter. A week or two passed after that whole mess, and I didn't hear a word from any of them. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was kind of expected, but still, it stung a bit. You'd think after I poured my heart out, they'd at least check in to see how I was doing, but nope, silence. And honestly, that silence spoke louder than anything else they could have said. But then, out of nowhere, Adam called me. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to pick up, but curiosity got the best of me, so I answered. He didn't waste any time with small talk or anything. He jumped right into it like, "So you're really done babysitting for us? Is that it?" I could already tell this wasn't going to be a nice conversation. I said, "Yeah, Adam, I'm done. I told you guys that already." He just sighed and then said something that completely floored me. "Leah and Sophie are thinking about cutting you off from seeing the kids." Now, I know my siblings can be selfish, but I didn't think they'd actually go that far. I was shocked. I asked him, "Are you serious? They're really going to use the kids against me because I won't babysit anymore?" Adam, in his usual blunt way, said, "Well, they feel like if you're not going to help out, then why should you get to hang out with the kids? It's a two-way street." I couldn't believe what I was hearing, so now I had to babysit just to be allowed to see my nieces and nephews? I was angry, like really angry. But I didn't want to let Adam know that. I kept it cool and said, "Look, I love those kids, but I'm not going to let you guys use them as pawns to get me to do what you want. If Leah and Sophie want to keep me from seeing them, that's on them." Adam didn't seem to care much either way. He just kind of shrugged it off and changed the subject. He started talking about his new job, how he was traveling more, and how tough it was balancing work and family. It was like he didn't even realize how messed up the whole situation was. I kept the conversation short, and when we hung up, I felt this weird mix of emotions. Part of me was heartbroken, thinking about not seeing the kids anymore, but another part of me was just done. Like, I couldn't keep doing this with them. The guilt, the manipulation, it was all too much. And if they were really going to punish me by keeping the kids away, then fine. I wasn't going to play their game. A couple more weeks went by, and then I got another call, this time from Sophie. She sounded super sweet, which was already a red flag because she's only nice like that when she wants something. She goes, "Hey, so I've been thinking, and the kids have been asking about you. They really miss you. I was wondering if you could maybe take them for a day next week. Just a day, nothing big. I promise I'll pick them up early." I almost laughed. She was doing exactly what Adam had warned me about, trying to get me back into babysitting by dangling the kids in front of me, but I wasn't falling for it. I told her, "I miss them too, but I'm not babysitting, Sophie. I've told you this." Her tone changed immediately. She went from sweet to pissed in about 2 seconds flat. "I don't understand why you're being so selfish. You used to love spending time with them, and now what? You're just too good for us? Too good for the family?" That hit a nerve, but I kept calm. It's not about being too good for anyone, it's about respect. I've given up so much for you guys, and when I needed help, no one was there. I'm not going back to being the person you call when you need something. Sophie wasn't having it. "Fine, do whatever you want, but don't come crying to us when the kids don't even remember who you are." And then she hung up. That call hit me harder than I expected. I sat there for a while just thinking about what she said. Was she right? Were the kids going to forget me? I had spent so much time with them, been there for every little milestone, every birthday, every scraped knee. It felt like I was losing them, and it hurt. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't go back to how things were. I tried to distract myself after that. I threw myself into work, tried to reconnect with some old friends, even started going out more. It felt weird at first, having time to actually focus on myself. For years, my whole life revolved around my family and their kids, and now that I wasn't involved anymore, I didn't really know what to do with myself. But slowly, I started to figure it out. Then, a few weeks later, I got the call that really broke me. It was Leah, and she sounded panicked. She said that her youngest, Emma, had been in an accident. Apparently, she'd fallen off her bike and broken her arm. Leah was rushing her to the hospital and needed me to watch her other two kids while they dealt with everything. My heart sank. I loved those kids, and the thought of Emma being hurt made me feel sick. But at the same time, I knew what this was. They only called me when they needed something. When they were in a bind, I was suddenly important again. I didn't know what to do. I felt guilty for even thinking about saying no, but I also didn't want to fall back into the same trap. So I took a deep breath and told Leah, "I'm sorry Emma's hurt, but I can't help right now. I hope she's okay." There was a long pause on the other end. Then Leah said in this cold, distant voice, "I can't believe you. After everything, you're really going to do this? I thought you cared about this family." And with that, she hung up. After that call with Leah, I honestly felt like the worst person in the world. I just kept thinking, what if Emma's really hurt and I'm sitting here refusing to help? But then, I had to remind myself, this wasn't my fault. This was a pattern. They only called me when they needed something. If it wasn't for the accident, would Leah have even reached out? I seriously doubted it. Still, the guilt was eating me up, so I texted Leah later that night. I just sent something simple like, "I hope Emma's okay. Let me know if you need anything." But surprise, surprise, no response. It was like they only wanted me around when it was convenient, and the second I set a boundary, I was dead to them. A few days went by, and I started hearing bits and pieces from other family members about how my siblings were really upset with me. Apparently, they were telling everyone that I had abandoned the family and that I didn't care about them anymore. It was wild. I couldn't believe they were twisting things like that. I wasn't the one who abandoned anyone. They did that to me when I was at my lowest. It all came to a head when my dad called me. Now, my dad isn't really involved in all the day-to-day drama. He's more of a let's keep the peace kind of guy. He calls me up and says, "We need to talk, kiddo." The minute he said that, I knew I was in for a lecture. We met up at his house, and as soon as I walked in, I could feel the tension. My dad was sitting at the kitchen table, and I could tell he was already stressed. He didn't even offer me coffee or anything, just got straight to it. He goes, "I've been hearing from your siblings, and they're really hurt by the way you've been acting." I wanted to roll my eyes so bad, but I kept it together. "Dad, I don't know what they've been telling you, but I haven't abandoned anyone. I've just stopped babysitting. That's it." He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't really on my side. "I get that you've been through a tough time, but family's family. You know how it is. Sometimes we have to do things we don't want to for the sake of the people we love." I couldn't believe it. My own dad was basically telling me to suck it up and go back to being their unpaid babysitter, all for the sake of family. I tried to explain how hurt I was, how they hadn't been there for me during my recovery, but it was like talking to a brick wall. He just kept saying things like, "They didn't mean to hurt you," and "everyone's busy with their own lives." By the end of that conversation, I was so frustrated I could barely see straight. My dad just didn't get it. He wasn't around enough to see how much I was bending over backward for my siblings, and he sure as hell didn't understand how abandoned I felt when they all ghosted me after my accident. He ended the talk with some classic, "Just try to work it out, kiddo. They love you, they really do." But love isn't treating someone like they only matter when it's convenient. After that, I stopped talking to pretty much all of them. It felt like the only way I could protect myself was by creating distance. I couldn't handle being around people who didn't respect me enough to treat me like an actual human being with my own needs and boundaries. So I blocked Leah and Sophie on my phone and deleted our group chat. Adam, I left unblocked because, honestly, he wasn't the worst of the three, but I wasn't exactly reaching out to him either. Then came the hardest part. The kids. I didn't want to cut them off completely. They had no idea what was going on, and it wasn't fair to them. So I reached out to one of my nieces, Natalie, who's 12 and old enough to have her own phone. I sent her a message, just asking how she was doing and telling her I missed her. She responded pretty quickly, saying she missed me too, and that she'd been asking her mom, Sophie, why she hadn't seen me in so long. That broke my heart. I didn't want the kids to think I just up and disappeared from their lives, but at the same time, I couldn't let myself get dragged back into being their go-to babysitter again. So I told Natalie that I loved her and her cousins, and I was always here for them, but things with the family were kind of complicated right now. She didn't really get it, but she said she understood, which I appreciated. Kids are way more understanding than people give them credit for. After that, I made it a point to stay in touch with the kids directly, without going through Leah or Sophie. I'd text them or send them little gifts every now and then, just to let them know I was still thinking of them. It wasn't the same as spending time with them, but it was the best I could do under the circumstances. A few months went by like that. I was still kind of figuring out who I was without my family constantly needing something from me. I started hanging out more with some coworkers, going to the gym again, doing things for myself. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my own life. But of course, nothing stays calm for long in my family. One day I get a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick it up, but something told me I should. Turns out it was Leah, using a different phone to call me since I'd blocked her. Real mature, right? She starts off with, I don't know what your problem is, but you need to stop ignoring me. No, hello, no, how are you? Just straight to the attitude. I told her I wasn't ignoring her, I was setting boundaries, and if she didn't like that, too bad. Leah wasn't having it. She started going off saying how the kids were suffering because of me, how they missed me, and how I was ruining the family. She even had the nerve to say, you're being selfish, you need to get over yourself and start acting like part of this family again. That was it. I'd had enough. I told her, you know what, Leah? Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is that you all took me for granted for years, and now that I'm finally standing up for myself, you don't like it. She tried to argue, but I wasn't having it. I hung up the phone and blocked that number too. After that, I knew there was no going back. I wasn't just taking a break from my family, I was done. Done with the manipulation, the guilt tripping, the constant demands. If they couldn't respect me or my boundaries, then they didn't deserve to be in my life. And you know what? I didn't feel guilty anymore. After blocking Leah for good, I honestly felt like a weight had been lifted. It was the first time in forever that I wasn't waking up stressed about when the next call or guilt trip would happen. I could just breathe. My days were my own, and it felt like I could actually focus on my life for once. But of course, it didn't stay quiet for long. About a month after that last blow-up, I got a letter in the mail. I don't get much mail besides bills, so I was surprised to see something handwritten with my name on it. When I opened it, I saw that it was from Sophie. She had written this long, dramatic letter about how disappointed she was in me and how I was tearing the family apart. It was full of the usual guilt trip garbage about how much the kids missed me and how I was letting them down. She even had the audacity to say, I hope one day you realize how selfish you're being and that it's not too late to fix this. Like, seriously? I was selfish? I gave up years of my life for them and now I'm the selfish one because I don't want to be their doormat anymore? I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash. I didn't even have the energy to get mad about it. At that point, I was just done with all their manipulation. If they wanted to paint me as the villain, fine. Let them. I wasn't going to waste another second of my life trying to prove myself to people who clearly didn't care about me unless they needed something. Around the same time, I got an email from Natalie, my niece. It was sweet, and she kept it casual, just telling me about her school and some stuff going on with her friends. I was glad to hear from her. I always told the kids they could reach out to me anytime, and Natalie was the only one who actually did. But something in the email caught my eye. She mentioned that her mom, Sophie, had told her I was too busy to see them anymore. Too busy. That was the lie they were telling the kids? I couldn't believe it. Instead of being honest and saying that there was some family drama, they were making it sound like I just didn't want to see the kids anymore. Like I was off living my best life and I didn't have time for them. It pissed me off, but I knew I couldn't take that anger out on Natalie. It wasn't her fault. So I responded to her email, saying I missed her and that I was always here if she needed me. I didn't bring up her mom's lie. I didn't want to drag Natalie into the mess. But it made me realize that this situation wasn't going to get better. My siblings were going to keep twisting things to make me look like the bad guy, and the kids were stuck in the middle of it. After a few weeks of stewing over it, I decided to make a final, clean break. I had to, for my own mental health. I couldn't keep playing this game with them, where I was constantly on edge, wondering what lie they'd tell next, or when they'd try to guilt me into coming back. So I changed my number again, blocked any emails from my siblings, and pretty much cut all ties. It hurt like hell, especially thinking about the kids, but I knew it was the right thing to do. The funny thing is, once I made that decision, I felt this huge sense of relief. It was like I could finally see clearly. For so long, I had been caught up in trying to keep everyone else happy, always sacrificing my own happiness and well-being for the sake of family. But family shouldn't make you feel like that. Family should support you, lift you up, not tear you down or use you when it's convenient. It wasn't easy, though. There were nights where I'd lie awake thinking about all the times we spent together. Holidays, birthdays, the laughs, the inside jokes. It's not like I didn't love my family. I did. But love isn't enough if the people you love don't respect you. That's the part I had to come to terms with. Then, out of nowhere, about 3 months after I cut them off completely, I got a message on Facebook from my mom. I don't talk about her much because she's never really been involved in the day-to-day drama with my siblings. She lives a few states away, and we've always had a kind of distant relationship. But she must have heard about what was going on because her message said, "We need to talk about what's been happening with your siblings. They're worried about you." I rolled my eyes so hard I thought they'd get stuck. Of course, they were worried now that they couldn't reach me to dump their problems on. I debated whether to even respond, but I figured it was worth at least explaining my side of things to my mom since she wasn't directly involved. I told her everything, how I'd always been there for my siblings, how they completely abandoned me when I needed help, and how I had to set boundaries to protect myself. I didn't sugarcoat it. I wanted her to know exactly why I had made the decisions I did. She took a few days to respond, but when she did, it was surprisingly supportive. She said she understood why I felt hurt and that she wished things had gone differently. But then she dropped the line that kind of threw me. Maybe it's time to forgive and move forward. Life's too short to hold grudges. That's when I realized something. This whole time, I'd been holding on to this idea that my family would eventually come around, that they'd see what they did wrong and apologize, and we'd all move forward. But that wasn't going to happen. They didn't think they did anything wrong, and they probably never would. So, I made peace with it. I wasn't going to forgive them because they hadn't asked for forgiveness or shown any remorse. But I was going to move on. I wasn't going to let their toxic behavior control my life anymore. And that's where I am now. It's been a few months since I cut them off for good. And while it's still hard sometimes, I know I made the right choice. I've started reconnecting with old friends, focusing on my career, and doing things that make me happy for once. I don't know what the future holds for my family, or if we'll ever truly make amends. But for now, I'm at peace with where things are. And that's all I can really ask for. My dad dumped me and divorced my mom. But years later, he gets a photo of me and begs I talk to him. I'm a 32-year-old guy, and I've got a story that's been part of my life for pretty much forever, and it's quite a roller coaster. So, buckle up. Here it goes. My whole drama started even before I was born. My mom discovered that my biological dad was cheating on her, which obviously put their marriage on really rocky ground. They started the divorce process, but then life threw a curveball. My mom found out she was pregnant with me. When she broke the news to my bio dad, he outright denied the possibility that I was his kid. He claimed he was infertile and accused my mom of cheating, demanding a paternity test. My mom was already emotionally shattered from all the cheating drama and his nasty accusations. Over the years, I've pieced together enough hints to suspect he was probably abusive too, though my mom has never explicitly confirmed this. Instead of dragging out a messy situation with paternity tests and more fights, my mom asked him to just give up his parental rights, especially since he was so adamant that I wasn't his kid. After that, she moved in with my grandparents, and that's where I was raised. Fast forward to when I was 14, I was hit with a wave of curiosity about this man. I pushed my mom to tell me the whole story, and after hearing it, my teenage brain got all these ideas about reuniting. I thought maybe my mom was just being petty, and if my bio dad knew for sure I was his son, he'd want to be a part of my life. I pressured her into contacting him, which she reluctantly did, only for him to send back this really hurtful letter full of insults and accusations. He called my mom all sorts of terrible names and accused her of just trying to get his money. That day was a turning point for me. I realized this guy was no father, and I decided I didn't need him at all. Now, let's skip to about 8 months ago. Apparently, my biological dad had some sort of near-death experience that changed his perspective. He tried to reach out to my mom to apologize for his past actions, but she wanted nothing to do with him. Somehow, he got a picture of me and noticed how much we look alike. This spurred him to contact me, claiming he was wrong back then and wanted a chance to get to know the only kid he had. At first, I ignored his attempts, but then he started throwing offers at me, paying off my student loans, buying me a house, taking me on expensive trips. I consistently refused. My fiancé, who's 29, knew about all of this and initially supported my decision to keep him out of our lives. But as he persisted and our financial burdens grew due to the global economic downturn, she began to see his offers as a potential solution. She urged me to reconsider and let him help us out financially, especially since we were drowning in debt and had even delayed our wedding to save money. Despite the temptation, something inside me just couldn't accept his money. It felt like accepting his help would somehow validate all the years he denied and ignored me. So I set up a meeting with him, looked him straight in the eyes, and told him I would never take a dime from him. I made it clear that if he continued to try to contact me, I would involve the police and get a restraining order. When I told my fiancée about the meeting, she was livid. She argued that by refusing his money without discussing it with her first, I was making unilateral decisions about our finances, which she saw as controlling and selfish. She felt that I should have considered our joint financial struggles and at least talked it over with her before shutting him out financially. After that argument, she packed up her things and left, and now she's not answering my calls or texts. So here I am, feeling torn and confused. On one hand, I stand by my decision to reject his offers because of the principles involved. On the other hand, I'm grappling with the fallout of that decision, which has now jeopardized my relationship with the woman I love. I'm stuck wondering if I made the right choice, and honestly, any advice or thoughts from you all would be incredibly helpful right now. Am I the idiot? Now for the top comments before the update. Not the idiot. This isn't a big financial decision. This is you squaring away family affairs, making it unclear about a relationship with a man you do not want. Unfortunately, your fiancé seems more interested in milking the situation of money rather than caring about how you feel. Good riddance to her, I'd say. Exactly. And you've just learned a valuable lesson. Your fiancé is manipulating you for financial gain without regard for your feelings. She just showed you her true colors. The more I think about it, the more I'm appalled by her behavior. She left in an attempt to manipulate you and guilt undertaking money from a possibly abusive person. She has no problem exposing you to a toxic relationship. Does it mean she'll get money out of it? Sounds like you're better off without her. She's only interested in money. Lucky break, dude. She just showed you who she is. If she was only interested in money, she wouldn't have been with him while he was involuntarily poor to the point of putting off their wedding. There's a difference between struggling and trying the best you can, and poverty tourist slumming it, which is a very difficult way of putting his situation, and assumes that the idiot dad is on the level, but makes the point I'm going to vote no idiots here. I think you need to keep in mind, though, your fiancé is being practical. While you're being emotional, you feel no connection to this man. While I understand pride and dignity, taking his money when he hasn't contributed to your upbringing at all and owes you some money would put you and your fiancé in a much better situation and wouldn't hurt any more or any less than what you're doing now. It's not the most honorable thing to do. It's not the be the bigger person thing to do. But practically speaking, it would make your life much easier and compensates somewhat for the disadvantages of growing up without a father. Update 1. It all started yesterday when my best buddy called me up. He sounded super weird, like he was wrestling with whether to tell me something big. After a bit of back and forth, he finally let it slip. He'd seen my fiancé meeting secretly with my biological dad. Yeah, the same dad who I've been trying to keep at arm's length. They were at this little out-of-the-way cafe, trying to be low-key, but my buddy recognized them right away. Now get this. During their sneaky coffee meeting, my dad handed my fiancé a big fat envelope stuffed with cash. My friend was close enough to catch snippets of their chat. It sounded like my dad was doling out cash to help out because he thinks family should support each other. Can you believe that? I was totally blindsided. I mean, she knew how much I didn't want his money or anything to do with him, and yet there she was, taking it right under my nose. The sense of betrayal hit me like a truck. It's not just about the money. It's that she went behind my back after everything we've been through together. And to make things even messier, she's been dodging me, not answering any of my calls or texts to explain her side of things. Now I'm stuck in this giant mess, feeling more betrayed than ever. I've got a dad who's trying to sneak his way into my life by throwing money around, and a fiancé who might be siding with him over me. It feels like they teamed up while I was left in the dark. So what's my move here? I'm wrestling with a few options. Do I pull them both together and confront them head on? Do I try to fix things with her, hoping there's a good reason behind all this secrecy? Or is it time to just move on and save myself from more heartache? Honestly, I'm stumped. This whole situation has shaken up what I thought I knew about trust and loyalty. If anyone out there has any wise words or advice, I'm all ears because navigating this drama is proving to be way trickier than I ever imagined. Update 2. All right, so after a couple of days filled with lots of thinking and not much sleeping, I decided it was time to clear the air with my fiancé. I mean, we couldn't just keep avoiding the giant elephant in the room, right? So I sent her a text, asking her to come over because we needed to sort things out once and for all. She agreed, and that evening, she walked into the apartment, and man, you could cut the tension with a knife. I didn't waste any time. As soon as she sat down, I jumped right in. "So I know you met with my dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady but feeling like my heart was pounding in my ears. "My friend saw you guys. Why didn't you tell me about it?" She let out this really long sigh like she was tired before the conversation even started. I knew you'd react this way, she said, looking down at her hands. I knew you'd think I betrayed you. But listen, I did it because we need help. We're so deep in debt and your dad was offering a way out. I felt stuck. I could feel my frustration bubbling up. But why go behind my back? Why not just talk to me about it? I asked, feeling a bit betrayed and a lot confused. She threw her hands up a bit defensively. Because I knew you'd just say no. Your pride and your issues with him would get in the way of us getting out of this financial mess. He was offering help, real, actual help, and I felt like I had to take it. Help? Or is he just trying to buy his way into our lives? I countered, feeling like the whole situation was slipping out of my control. You know how he is. He's manipulative. How can you even think of trusting him? She paused, looking really unsure for a moment. I don't trust him, not really, she admitted slowly. But I trust us. I trust that we're strong enough to use his help without letting him control us. I shook my head, feeling more upset by the second. It's not just about the money, though. It's about trust, our trust. And now I don't know if I can trust you. Her face fell and she looked really hurt. That's not fair, she said, her voice cracking. I'm doing everything I can to keep us afloat. I'm making hard choices because I care about our future. Doesn't that count for something? From there, things got really heated. We both started bringing up old problems, things that had been bothering us for a while but we'd never really talked about. She said she felt like she was dealing with our money issues all on her own, and that sometimes it felt like I wasn't even in it with her. I told her how betrayed I felt, how it seemed like she was choosing money over our relationship. We talked and argued for what felt like hours. By the end, we were both just sitting there, totally drained. There was this heavy silence, and then she asked in a really small voice, "What do we do now?" I honestly didn't know. Everything felt so messed up, so complicated. Maybe, maybe we need some space, I said finally, the words tasting bitter as they came out. She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks, and without saying much more, she started to pack some of her things. I watched her, feeling like my heart was breaking. Was this really happening? Were we actually falling apart over this? She left, and I was alone in the apartment, surrounded by all these memories of us. Now I'm left wondering if that's it for us, if we're really done, or if there's some way we can get past this. It's all so overwhelming, and I'm not sure where to go from here. I guess I just need some time to think about everything and try to figure out what comes next. Update 3. After what felt like forever, but was probably just a few long, quiet days, my phone finally buzzed with a message that kind of changed the direction of everything. It was my fiancée. She texted that she really missed talking and asked if we could meet up at our old favorite spot, the little cafe where we first figured out we were kind of perfect for each other. Despite the mess between us, I felt this spark of hope and agreed immediately. The cafe was its usual cozy self, filled with the smell of fresh coffee and pastries. She was there before me, looking nervous but hopeful. We ordered our usual coffee and pastries, the ones we used to share on lazy Saturdays. Then, we found a quiet corner to dive into everything that had happened. She started the conversation, which surprised me a bit. "I've missed you," she said, looking straight into my eyes. "And I've had a lot of time to think about how everything exploded. I'm really sorry for going behind your back with your dad. I should have talked to you first. That was wrong, and I get why you felt betrayed." Hearing her say that, my own walls started to come down a bit. "I've missed you too," I admitted, feeling a mix of relief and lingering frustration. "But it's not just about the money or meeting him. It's about us, how we're supposed to handle things together. We're a team, right?" She agreed immediately, her eyes welling up a bit. "You're right. I let my worry about our debts make me do something stupid. I promise if we move past this, I'll never make decisions like that without you again." We talked a lot more after that. We opened up about our fears of the future, our hopes, and how stressed we had been feeling about money. It felt like we were slowly finding our way back to each other. Just then, in the middle of our deep talk, my phone rang. It was my mom. I hesitated, but decided to pick up. Mom was straight to the point. "Don't let money break you two apart," she said in her no-nonsense way. "You both love each other, anyone can see it. Money comes and goes, but love? Don't throw that away because of this mess." That hit me hard, right in the feels. My mom has always been about seeing the big picture, and she nailed it again this time. I hung up and shared what Mom said with my fiancée. She laughed a little, probably more from relief than anything. "Your mom always knows just what to say, huh?" "Yeah," I smiled back at her, feeling a bit lighter. "She's got a knack for cutting through the mess." We decided it was time to head back to our apartment, a place that had seen better days with us. Walking in, Everything looked the same but felt different, like we were stepping back into our life together, but with new eyes. Sitting down together on our couch, still holding hands, felt right. We've got a lot to work through, I said. Money issues, trust, handling tough times. But I think we can do it, if we're honest and open, no matter how hard it gets. She nodded, squeezing my hand. I agree. Let's start fresh. Full honesty, always. And let's set some ground rules for future money stuff. Especially with family, she added, trying to make us both smile. I chuckled, grateful for the lighter moment. Ground rules sound good. And maybe we could take a budgeting class or something? Tackle this as a team? Deal, she smiled. And it felt like we were making a new kind of promise to each other. So we're trying again. We know it's not going to be simple or easy, but something about facing it all together makes it feel possible, even hopeful. We have a bunch of stuff to figure out, but maybe, just maybe, we can turn all these challenges into something that makes us stronger than we were before. Thanks to everyone who's been sending good thoughts and advice our way. Here's to facing the mess and finding the magic that comes after you sort it all out. Update 4. I thought things were starting to settle, maybe even get a bit normal again after all the recent drama with my fiancé and my bio dad. But man, was I wrong. It was a typical Thursday, just like any other. I was coming home from work thinking maybe tonight would be a chill night. You know, just kick back, throw on a movie, and relax with my fiancé. But the universe had other plans, it seems. The moment I opened the door to our apartment, my heart pretty much stopped. There, sitting right on our couch like he owned the place, was my bio dad. The last person I ever wanted to see chilling in my living room. The shock of seeing him there just froze me for a second. Before I could snap out of it, my fiancé was up and talking fast, trying to smooth things over before they even got rough. I know this is a shock, but I thought it might be good if you guys could just talk, face to face. Maybe it would help, she said, looking really anxious. Help? I repeated, feeling my temperature rise. How could you think this would help anything? I didn't even give him a chance to settle in. I just said, I think you should leave. Now. My voice was calm, but it was like ice. I guess he could tell I wasn't messing around because he didn't argue. He just got up and left, but the storm was just starting. As soon as the door shut behind him, I turned to her, really letting my anger show. How could you do this? How could you think bringing him here was a good idea? She tried to explain, her voice all shaky. I thought if you could just see him, talk to him, maybe things could change. Maybe you'd see things differently. Behind my back? Again? I was shouting now, couldn't hold it in. We just talked about trust, about making decisions together. And you go and do this? She was crying now, really crying. I just wanted to help. I hate seeing you so upset about him. I thought if you two could just clear the air. Clear the air? You think a chat would just fix everything? My words were harsh and I wasn't pulling any punches. I told you I don't want his money, his help, nothing. I thought I made that clear. Through her tears, she kept saying, I was just trying to help. I love you. I was trying to do something good. But I was too far gone, too wrapped up in my own betrayal and anger. I can't do this anymore, I told her, feeling a mix of rage and something like despair. I can't keep wondering when the next secret meeting or decision is going to pop up. She sobbed harder, pleading with me, please don't do this. I really did it because I love you. I thought it might bring peace. Peace? Or control? Were you trying to manipulate how I feel about my own father? The words were out before I could stop them, each one like a blow. Finally, she just stood there, looking at me with tears streaming down her face. It was quiet for a moment, a terrible, heavy quiet. I think you should leave, I said, for good. She didn't say much after that, just gathered her things, her shoulders shaking with sobs, and left. The door clicked shut, and that sound? It was like the final note in a song, the end of something big. Now the apartment feels empty, too big, too quiet. I'm left wondering if I went too far, if maybe I should have handled it differently. But every time I think about it, I come back to feeling betrayed, blindsided in my own home. It's a mess, a real mess, and I'm just sitting here trying to figure out if I could have done something different, something better. So yeah, that's where I am, alone, confused, and not sure where to go from here. If anyone's been through something like this, or if you've got any advice, I could really use some right now. Because honestly, everything feels pretty broken and I'm not sure how to start fixing it. Update 5. Ever since that day I walked into my apartment and found my fiancé and my bio dad there, things have been spiraling. I made a tough call to end things with her. It wasn't an easy decision, especially with all the history and feelings involved, but after she betrayed my trust not just once, but twice, I couldn't see any other way to keep my sanity. Since then, she's tried pretty hard to reach out to me. My phone was blowing up with her calls and texts, and she even tried to connect through emails. But honestly, I just couldn't deal with it. I felt like if I started talking to her, I might just fall back into the old pattern, and I couldn't risk that. So, I did what felt like the only thing I could. I blocked her. Blocked her on my phone, social media, everywhere. It was like I had to erase her presence to stop myself from crumbling. But she didn't stop there. She went for what she thought might be her last resort. She went to talk to my mom. Yeah, she showed up at my mom's place, hoping maybe my mom could mend what was broken between us. When I heard about it, I couldn't believe it. Here's how the conversation went down when I called my mom. Mom, what's going on? Why is she there? I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Well, she's very upset, honey. She's asking for just one more chance to talk to you. She thinks you two can work it out, my mom explained, her voice calm and gentle. Mom, I just can't. How am I supposed to trust her again after everything? She went to him twice, even knowing how messed up that was for me, I said, my voice getting a bit louder than I intended. I understand, honey, but completely shutting her out. Are you sure that's what you want to do? Mom's voice was full of concern, making me second-guess myself for a moment. Yes, I'm sure. She made her choices, and now I've made mine. I need you to respect that, Mom. Please, I replied, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. My mom sighed, a deep, weary sigh. Okay, I'll respect your decision. I won't push you on this. But you know I'm here if you need to talk any time. Thanks, Mom. I appreciate it, I said, feeling a little relieved but still pretty shaken up. After hanging up, I felt this weird mix of emotions. Relief, because my mom wasn't going to push me to talk to her. Sadness, because it really felt over now. And loneliness because, let's be honest, breaking up sucks. The apartment seemed too quiet, too big, just too much without her. Now, I'm just trying to keep busy. Work's been a decent distraction, and hanging out with friends helps. But there are moments, usually at night, when everything feels a bit too still, and I start wondering about everything. Did I make the right call? Could things have been different? I've been doing a lot of thinking about trust, about relationships, and about how to move on from someone when you really didn't want to let go in the first place. It's not easy. Some days are better than others. Some days I feel okay, almost normal. Other days, it feels like I'm just going through the motions. If anyone out there has gone through something similar, or if you've got any advice on how to handle this kind of stuff, I'd really appreciate hearing from you. It's tough feeling like you're in this alone, and sometimes just knowing there are others out there who get what you're going through can make a big difference. So, that's where I'm at. Just taking it one day at a time, trying to figure out life post-breakup, and hoping that eventually, things will start to feel a bit more normal. Update 6. About a month after everything went down with my ex-fiancée, the whole messy breakup and all the drama that followed, I ended up meeting someone new. Totally unexpected, but it's been awesome. We met at a friend's backyard BBQ. She was laughing at some joke someone made, and I just had to know what was so funny. We started talking, and well, we haven't really stopped since. She's incredible, super understanding, laughs at my jokes, and she's got this way of making everything seem all right. After hanging out a few times, I realized I really liked her. Like a lot. But I knew if this was going to go anywhere, I had to be upfront about all my baggage, especially the heavy stuff with my biological dad. So one evening, we were just chilling at this little diner we both like, and I decided it was time to tell her everything. I was super nervous, not gonna lie. I mean, it's not every day you tell someone about the deepest dramas of your life, right? I started with the basics. So there's something kinda heavy I need to tell you about me and my past. And from there, I just spilled it. Everything about how my dad denied being my dad, how he treated my mom, and the whole mess with my ex trying to sneak him back into my life. She listened to the whole thing, didn't interrupt once, just took it all in. When I was done, there was this pause, and I was just watching her, trying to figure out what she was thinking. Then she did something I didn't expect but totally appreciated. She reached over, took my hand, and said, "Wow, that's a lot to carry around. But you know what? I'm here for you. Whatever's happened, whatever comes next, I'm on your side." Man, hearing that felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. It was so good to have someone just get it and stand by me without making it all complicated. Just as I was getting used to how great things were going, I got this call out of nowhere. It was from a woman who said she was my aunt, my dad's sister. I didn't even know I had an aunt. She sounded pretty serious and a little upset. "Your dad's really sick," she told me. "He's not doing well at all, and it might be your last chance to see him." That news hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't ready for it. Not at all. I mean, I had just started to get my life back on track, and then this? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. I appreciate you telling me this, but I've made peace with how things are between me and him. I don't think seeing him now would change anything or be good for either of us, I said, trying to be as polite but firm as I could. She pushed back a bit, talking about family and forgiveness and all that, but I just couldn't. I'm really sorry, but I've got to stand by my decision. Please respect that, I told her, and after a few more exchanges, we ended the call. After hanging up, I was pretty shaken. I talked to my new girlfriend about it, and she was amazing. Just listening, supporting, and reinforcing that I had to do what felt right for me. So, you do what's best for you, she said, squeezing my hand. I've got your back no matter what. And that's where I'm at right now. I'm navigating this new, exciting relationship and dealing with these blasts from the past that just won't seem to let me go. But having someone who supports you without judgment, who stands by you through the weird, tough times, it changes everything. It makes the tough stuff a little easier to handle. Life's a wild ride, that's for sure. If you've ever been through anything like this, feel free to share your story. Knowing we're not alone in our struggles can really make a difference. Here's to new beginnings and handling whatever life throws our way, with a little help from our friends and maybe a new special someone. Update 7. It all started with a phone call that came out of the blue from a guy who introduced himself as a lawyer. I was already on edge thinking, what now? He got straight to the point. I'm calling about your father. He's passed away. That sentence alone felt like a punch to the gut. I hadn't seen or spoken to my dad in forever, and our last real interaction was anything but pleasant. The lawyer continued, not missing a beat. He left a will, and he's included you quite significantly. There's also a letter for you. He left a substantial sum of money in your name. My brain was scrambling at this point. Money? A letter? From him? Why? I barely managed to mutter, I see. This is a lot to take in. Of course, these situations are never easy. We can arrange a meeting to discuss this further and go through the details whenever you're ready, the lawyer replied, sounding all calm and professional. I agreed to meet him, more out of curiosity about the letter than the money. I ended the call, and my thoughts were racing. I immediately dialed up my new girlfriend, who has been a rock through recent times. Hey, so my dad passed away, I started, and even saying that felt weird. I told her about the will, the money, and especially the letter. I don't know how to feel about all this, I admitted. That's a lot to handle, she said, her voice full of concern. What do you want to do about the money? I honestly don't know, I sighed heavily. It feels weird, like my whole life, I said I'd never take anything from him. She gave me one of those looks, the kind that says she's thinking deep. Maybe think of it this way. Maybe this was his attempt to make things right. You don't have to see it as agreeing with how he treated you, but maybe as something to help you move forward. Her words helped a bit, but man, was it a lot to digest. A few days later, I found myself in the lawyer's office, a neat little room lined with books and papers. He handed me the letter my dad wrote, and I felt like my heart was pounding as I opened it. My son, I've had a lot of time to think about my actions and their impact on you and your mother. I deeply regret the pain I've caused, and not being there as a father should. In my last days, I realized the full weight of my absence. I hope this money can serve as a small part of mending the gap between us. It's meant to help you build your future, and perhaps offer some peace. I'm truly sorry for everything. Dad, reading that, all sorts of feelings washed over me. Anger, sadness, a weird kind of forgiveness, and even a bit of relief. It was a lot to process. I talked it all through with my girlfriend later that day. He really tried to reach out even now, I told her, shaking my head. Yeah, but this decision is yours. It's about what you need to move forward, she said, always trying to keep me focused on what matters most. Now I'm stuck wrestling with this big decision. Do I take the money, close this chapter, and maybe use it for something good? Or would taking it feel like I'm forgetting all the pain and struggle his actions caused? This isn't an easy choice, and I'm really torn. If any of you have had to deal with something like this, or even if you just have some thoughts on what might be the right thing to do, I'd really appreciate hearing from you. It's one of those times when a little shared wisdom could really help lighten the load. So that's the update. New beginnings mixed with old issues trying to find closure. Here's hoping whatever decision I make, it's the one that leads to peace and moving forward. Thanks for sticking around and hearing me out. Cut off dad after he ruined my childhood, but he's the perfect dad to his stepdaughters. So, growing up, I always felt like something was off with my dad. I mean, I knew he worked hard, but it was more than that. He wasn't just busy, he was distant. He was like never really there for me and my sister Claire. I remember my mom trying so hard to make everything feel normal, but it was obvious something was broken between them. They argued a lot, but it was mostly over small stuff: money, work, random things we did wrong. My dad, James, had this way of making everything feel like our fault. I know it sounds weird, but I still have good memories of him. Like, I got my love for cheesy action movies from him. He'd always watch those, and sometimes we'd sit together and laugh about how unrealistic they were. But even then, it felt like those moments were rare. Most of the time, he'd come home from work, tired and angry, and just kind of take that out on us. Not physically, but with his words, his tone, you know what I mean? He'd make everything seem like it was a burden, and us, his own kids, were part of that burden. The thing is, he wasn't always like that. There were times when he could be nice, or at least less cold. But then, as I got older, I started to realize that nice was only when he had no reason to be mad. The moment something went wrong, even the smallest thing, it was like he became this different person. He'd yell about things that didn't even make sense, like the time I accidentally left a light on in the kitchen overnight. You'd think I burned the house down with how mad he got. He called me careless, said I didn't respect the home, but I was a kid. I didn't know any better. And Claire, she got it worse. She was always the one who stood up to him, and I think that's why he targeted her more. Whenever she tried to defend herself, it just made things worse. She had this strong personality, didn't take crap from anyone, but that only made my dad more frustrated. One time, she asked him why he didn't spend more time with us, and instead of answering, he just exploded, said he was out working to support us, and how dare we question him. It made me scared to even talk to him sometimes. Then one day, everything just kind of fell apart. My mom couldn't take it anymore. They'd been fighting a lot, and it finally got to a point where she had enough. She asked for a divorce. I wasn't surprised, but it still hit hard. I thought, maybe, after the divorce, things would get better. Maybe he'd try harder to be a real dad. I mean, I was old enough by then to understand that adults have their own problems, and I figured, without the constant arguing with my mom, he'd be more present for us. I was so wrong. About a year after the divorce, James remarried. He didn't even tell us. No heads up, no, hey, I'm seeing someone. Nothing. One day I found out he married this woman, Susan, completely out of the blue. I heard it from someone else, not even from him. It was like I didn't exist anymore. But what hurt even more was finding out that her daughters, Lily and Sarah, were invited to the wedding. So basically, he could invite these two girls, who he barely knew, but not his actual daughters. Claire and I were pissed. I mean, how do you get married and not invite your kids? It felt like such a slap in the face. That's when I decided to go no contact. I was done. Claire agreed, and we both just cut him off. I didn't see the point in trying anymore. He clearly didn't care about us, so why should I keep putting in the effort? I remember thinking, if he wants to play dad to someone else's kids, fine, but I'm not sticking around to watch it. For a long time, I didn't talk to him. Honestly, it was kind of freeing. I didn't have to deal with the constant disappointment. I could focus on my life without feeling like I was always trying to chase after someone who didn't care. I met Mike, my boyfriend at the time, and we started building a life together. Things were going good for me, better than they'd been in years. But deep down, there was always this nagging feeling. Like, I still wanted my dad to be a part of my life, even after everything he'd done. When Mike proposed, I thought maybe it was time to let go of the grudge. You know, try to be the bigger person. I figured inviting him to the wedding was a good way to start fresh. I didn't want to carry that anger with me into this new chapter of my life. So, before sending out invites, I unblocked him on Facebook just to see what he'd been up to. I don't even know why I did it, honestly. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I just wanted to know if he'd changed. What I found hit me like a punch to the gut. His profile picture was him, Susan, Lily, and Sarah, all smiling like the perfect little family. The caption said something about how they meant the world to him. The world. He had never, not once, posted anything like that about me or Claire. I just sat there staring at the screen, feeling like I'd been replaced. Like I was never good enough for him to care about in the way he clearly cared about them. It didn't stop there. As I kept scrolling, I saw more and more pictures. Vacations, birthdays, even holidays. He had taken them to Hawaii, something he never did for us. Growing up, the only vacations James took were for himself. He'd go on hunting trips alone and leave us behind. And now he's taking Susan's daughters on fancy trips to tropical islands? I couldn't believe it. The thing that really got me, though, was when I found out he had bought them dogs. He never let us have pets growing up. In fact, he got rid of my dog when I was in school one day because it barked too much. I came home, and my dog was gone. Just like that. He didn't even give me a chance to say goodbye. But here he is, buying these girls dogs and treating them like they're his own daughters. It was like he had a whole new life, and there was no room for me or Claire in it. Seeing all that just opened up old wounds. I realized that no matter what I did, I was never going to have the dad I needed. He was always going to choose someone else over me. It hurt, but at the same time, it made me see things clearly. James was never going to change. He was always going to be the guy who put himself first, even if it meant abandoning his own kids. And honestly, I don't know why I expected anything different. I thought seeing those Facebook pictures was the worst part, but nope. Things got way worse after that. After all the scrolling and feeling like crap, I told myself to just let it go. I was done being angry. I mean, Mike and I had a wedding to plan, and I wasn't going to let James and his new perfect family mess that up for me. But then, something happened that I didn't expect. One day, out of the blue, I get a text from Claire. We weren't talking about James much, but she sends me this screenshot. It's a photo of James and Susan's daughters, Lily and Sarah, wearing matching dresses that looked expensive as hell. And the caption said something like, "Proud dad moment with my beautiful girls." My first thought was, what the hell? Because he never called me or Claire his beautiful girls growing up. Like, not once. I didn't even know how to respond, but Claire wasn't done. She told me she'd been talking to him again, just trying to test the waters and see if things could ever be normal. I didn't blame her. She'd always been more forgiving than me. But then she says James offered to help pay for Lily and Sarah's college tuition. Yeah, you heard that right. College. For them. Let me just pause here for a second. The same guy who constantly told me and Claire that we couldn't afford any extra help when we were applying to colleges. The same guy who made me take out student loans because that's how the real world works. Yeah, he was offering to pay for two girls who weren't even his biological kids. I was fuming. I didn't know if I was more mad or just plain hurt, but either way, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I remember calling Mike and just unloading everything on him. I told him about the tuition thing, about the stupid matching dresses, and how James never once offered to help with our college. Mike was supportive as always, and he just listened while I ranted. But what he said next really stuck with me. You have every right to be upset, Emily, but at the end of the day, is he really worth all this energy? That hit me hard. Like, Mike was right. Why was I letting this man, who clearly didn't care about me or Claire, take up so much space in my head? It wasn't like he was going to magically change and start acting like the dad we deserved. But even though I knew that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It's like all these years of being ignored were bubbling to the surface, and I didn't know how to deal with it. Then the next thing happened. My mom called. Now, my mom and I have always been close, but ever since the divorce, she hasn't talked about James much. She figured we were better off without him, and honestly, she was right. But she calls me one day, and I could tell something was up by the tone of her voice. She says, "You're not going to believe what I heard." Apparently, James had been telling everyone, like family, friends, whoever would listen, that he was so proud of his new daughters, and he couldn't wait to walk them down the aisle when they got married. He was literally going around acting like Lily and Sarah were his real kids. He even told one of our cousins that Susan and her girls were the best thing to ever happen to him. I swear my blood was boiling. Like, how do you go from being a crappy dad who never cared to now being dad of the year for two random girls? It felt like such a slap in the face. And the whole walking them down the aisle thing? That really stung. I mean, I'm the one getting married soon, and he hadn't even reached out to see if I wanted him there. It was clear he didn't care about us anymore, but this felt like a whole new level of rejection. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for him to do the right thing. I decided that if he couldn't be bothered to be a part of my life, then I didn't need him at my wedding. I called Claire to let her know what was going on, and she understood completely. She was dealing with her own issues with James, and while she was trying to keep things civil, she wasn't about to defend him either. Then, just as I was starting to come to terms with everything, I got hit with another shocker. Claire mentioned that James had given Lily one of our grandmother's necklaces. It was this beautiful piece of jewelry that had been in our family for generations. Growing up, Claire and I would always admire it when we visited our grandma, and she would tell us stories about how it was passed down to the eldest daughter. We always assumed it would go to one of us, but nope. Turns out James gave it to Lily, just like that, without even mentioning it to us. I was speechless. I couldn't even process what was happening anymore. How could he just give away something so meaningful, something that was supposed to be part of our family's history, to someone who wasn't even related to us? It was like every little piece of my childhood was being erased, and James was just handing it off to his new family without a second thought. That was the final straw for me. I didn't need any more reasons to cut him off, but this just sealed the deal. I wasn't going to sit back and watch while James replaced us in every way possible. I blocked him on Facebook again, deleted his number from my phone, and decided to focus on the people who actually cared about me, like my mom, Claire, and Mike. I didn't need James anymore. He could have his new family, his vacations, his stepdaughters, and his college funds. I was done chasing after a man who clearly didn't care. I was done letting him hurt me over and over again. Update 1. After blocking my dad on Facebook and deciding I was done with him, I felt this weird mix of relief and anger. Like, yeah, I wasn't going to deal with his crap anymore, but there was still this part of me that couldn't let it go. I kept thinking, how did it get to this point? How did my dad become a stranger who couldn't care less about me or Claire? But as much as I wanted to just move on, life wasn't letting me do that. One day, Claire calls me up, sounding kind of off. She goes, "Hey, did you know Dad is throwing a huge birthday party for Lily and Sarah?" I didn't even need to ask because of course I didn't know. Why would I? I wasn't part of his life anymore. But hearing that still hit me like a punch to the gut. Claire kept talking, filling in all the details. Apparently, James had rented out some fancy venue, hired a DJ, and was throwing what sounded like the birthday party of the year for two girls who weren't even his. The kicker? It was happening right around the same time as my birthday. I'm not even kidding. My birthday was coming up, and he hadn't said anything to me. Not a card, not a text, nothing. But here he was, going all out for Lily and Sarah, like they were the most important people in the world to him. Now, I'm not the type of person who expects big celebrations or anything. I never have been. But the fact that he couldn't even acknowledge my birthday while planning this extravagant party for his stepdaughters? That stung. I tried to brush it off, but it was hard. I mean, this wasn't just him forgetting or being busy. This was him actively putting someone else first. Again. I remember sitting with Mike that night, telling him everything. He just listened, like he always did, but I could tell he was frustrated for me. He asked, "So, what are you going to do about it?" That question threw me off because honestly, I hadn't even thought about doing anything. I'd already blocked James, so what more was there to do? But Mike's question stuck with me. It made me realize that maybe I wasn't done after all. A few days later, I found myself talking to my mom about the whole situation. She wasn't exactly surprised when I told her about the birthday party. She knew how James was, how he'd always been. But then she said something that kind of changed everything for me. She goes, "Emily, you don't have to keep letting him hurt you. You're allowed to stand up for yourself." I hadn't really thought about it like that before. In my mind, cutting him off was me standing up for myself. But maybe there was more I needed to do. Maybe I needed to let him know how badly he'd hurt me. So I made a decision. I was going to write him a letter. Not an angry, rant-filled letter, but something that laid it all out there. I wanted him to understand what he'd done, even if he didn't care. It took me a few days to figure out what to say. I kept starting and stopping, not sure how to even begin. But eventually, I just let myself write whatever came to mind. I told him how disappointed I was in him, how it felt like he'd abandoned me and Claire for this new family. I reminded him of all the times he hadn't been there for us growing up, and how that had only gotten worse after the divorce. I wrote about how hurt I was when I found out he didn't invite us to his wedding, how seeing those Facebook posts made me feel like I didn't even exist to him anymore. I even brought up the college tuition thing, and the necklace he gave Lily, just to drive home the point that he'd completely replaced us in every way possible. The hardest part to write, though, was the end. Because deep down, I knew that this letter wasn't going to change anything. I wasn't expecting some magical apology or for him to suddenly realize how much he'd hurt me. But I needed him to know that I wasn't going to sit back and pretend like everything was okay anymore. I needed him to know that I was done. After I finished the letter, I showed it to Claire. She was supportive, but I could tell she was a little nervous about me sending it. She'd been trying to keep things civil with James, and she didn't want to ruin whatever fragile relationship they had. But she understood why I had to do it. So I mailed it off, not really knowing what would happen next. Weeks went by, and I didn't hear anything. I wasn't surprised, but part of me kept checking my phone, wondering if he'd respond. Nothing. It was like the letter never existed. But then, one day, I get a message. Not from James, though. It was from Susan, his wife. And it wasn't anything nice either. She basically told me that I had no right to speak to James the way I did, that he was doing the best he could, and I was being ungrateful and selfish for not appreciating all he'd done for me and Claire. She went on this whole rant about how raising stepdaughters is just as important as raising biological kids, and that I needed to grow up and accept that my dad had moved on. I was floored. First of all, I hadn't even mentioned her or her daughters in the letter. It was between me and my dad, and somehow she made it all about her. Second, how dare she tell me I'm being ungrateful? She didn't live through the years of neglect and disappointment that Claire and I did. She didn't know what it was like to be constantly pushed aside. I didn't respond to her message. I didn't see the point. But that was the moment I realized something big. James wasn't just choosing his stepdaughters over us. He was letting Susan dictate everything. She had become the most important person in his life, and there was no room for me or Claire. And maybe there never would be. That realization hit me hard. It wasn't just about the vacations or the college money or the birthday party. It was about the fact that my dad had built a whole new life without us. He had made his choice, and as painful as it was, I knew I had to let him go. Update 2. All right, so after that whole mess with Susan's message, I thought things were finally starting to settle down. I had mentally checked out from everything with my dad and his new family. I wasn't expecting anything from him anymore. Like, I was finally in a place where I could focus on myself and my own life, especially with my wedding coming up. But of course, just when I think things are calming down, something else has to happen. A few months before the wedding, I get a call from Claire. Now, we talk a lot, but I could tell right away from her voice that this wasn't a normal chat. She was kind of dancing around the point at first, asking me about wedding stuff, if I'd picked out my dress yet, the usual. Then finally, she just drops it. So, Dad called me. I swear my heart just sank. I hadn't heard from him in so long, I almost forgot he existed. But there it was, hanging in the air like a giant cloud. I asked Claire what he wanted, and she hesitated for a second before telling me, he asked if you'd reconsider inviting him to the wedding. At first, I didn't even know what to say. I mean, after everything, after the years of neglect, after replacing us with his stepdaughters, after giving away family heirlooms and throwing birthday parties like he was the world's best dad, now he wanted to be part of my wedding? I just sat there in silence for a few seconds, processing it. Claire kept going, telling me that he sounded sincere, like he really wanted to be there. She said he mentioned how much it would mean to him to see me get married, how he felt bad for not being a part of my life recently. And then, of course, he had to throw in that whole family is family line, like that somehow erases all the crap he put me and Claire through over the years. It was like a part of me wanted to believe him, you know? I wanted to believe that he finally realized how much he'd hurt us and that this was his way of trying to make amends. But at the same time, there was this overwhelming feeling of too little, too late. Where was all this regret when I needed him growing up? Where was this when he was giving away my grandma's necklace or throwing lavish parties for people who weren't even his kids? I told Claire I needed to think about it. I didn't want to make a decision in the heat of the moment, especially since my wedding was supposed to be a happy day. I didn't want his sudden appearance to mess that up. But of course, once the thought was in my head, it was all I could think about. I talked it over with Mike that night. He was supportive, as usual, but he was also realistic about it. He said, "Do you really want him there? Or are you feeling guilty for not inviting him?" And that question just hit me hard. I did feel guilty, but not for the reasons you might think. I felt guilty because part of me still wanted him there. Even after everything, even after the years of hurt, there was this stupid part of me that still wanted my dad at my wedding. It felt like I was betraying myself by even considering it. The next few days were a blur of back and forth in my head. One minute, I was convinced that I should let him come, give him one last chance to be part of my life. The next minute, I was furious all over again, thinking about how easily he'd replaced me and Claire with his new family. How could I let someone who had caused me so much pain walk me down the aisle? I ended up calling my mom. She's always been the one to keep things grounded, and I knew she'd have some insight. When I told her about James wanting to come to the wedding, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that kind of broke me. "Emily, it's your wedding. You don't owe him anything." That's when it hit me. I really didn't owe him anything. I'd spent my whole life trying to make him care, trying to be the daughter he wanted, but it was never enough. And now, after all this time, I was still thinking about his feelings, when it should have been about me and Mike. I didn't need to invite him just because he was my dad. I didn't need to let him into my life if he didn't deserve to be there. So I made my decision. I wasn't going to invite him. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of thinking he could swoop back in at the last minute and pretend like he hadn't abandoned me. This was my day, and I wasn't going to let him ruin it. When I called Claire to tell her, she was a little surprised, but ultimately understood. I could tell she still had some hope for him, but she respected my choice. And that's all I needed. I didn't need validation from anyone else. I wasn't looking for approval. This was about me finally taking control of my own life, without James hanging over my head. A couple of days later, I sent out the final invitations. And sure enough, James wasn't on the list. I thought I'd feel guilty about it, but honestly, I didn't. I felt lighter, like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing after my dad's approval. I wasn't trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. I was just living my life on my terms, and that felt pretty damn good. Update 3. The day of the wedding came faster than I thought it would. I mean, we'd spent months planning, stressing over every little detail, but when the actual day arrived, it felt like it snuck up on me. I woke up that morning, surrounded by my best friends and my sister Claire, who'd been helping me with everything. Honestly, I felt more nervous than I expected, but it wasn't because of the usual stuff. It wasn't about the dress, or the ceremony, or whether the flowers were going to look right. It was about the fact that my dad wasn't going to be there. As I was getting ready, I kept having these moments where I'd wonder if I made the right choice. I knew deep down I had. But you know how it is. There's always that little voice in the back of your mind making you second guess everything. It's like, for so long, I'd imagined what this day would be like, and in some tiny corner of my brain, I'd always pictured my dad walking me down the aisle. I guess I had to let go of that version of things, and that's what felt weird. But Claire was there, as always, making sure I didn't fall apart. She knew me well enough to tell when I was overthinking, and every time I started spiraling, she'd snap me back to reality with something like, "Emily, this is your day. You've got nothing to worry about." She was right. I knew she was right. But still, the absence of James hung over everything. As I was getting my hair done, I remember looking in the mirror and thinking about all the times growing up when I wanted him to be proud of me. Like I'd imagine him watching me graduate, or congratulating me on my first job. But none of that ever happened. And now, on one of the biggest days of my life, he wasn't going to be there. But it wasn't because of me. It was because of him. That realization made me feel a lot better. Mike, of course, was the calmest person in the world that morning. He texted me a few hours before the ceremony, just a simple "I love you" that instantly made me smile. He wasn't the type to get wrapped up in drama, and he'd always been the steady, reliable part of my life. The one who showed up, who cared, who loved me for who I was. If anyone was supposed to be by my side on my wedding day, it was him. And when I thought about it that way, it made everything feel right again. The ceremony was beautiful. I don't want to get too cheesy here, but it really was. The sun was shining, the venue looked amazing, and when it came time to walk down the aisle, I didn't feel sad or angry anymore. My mom walked me down the aisle, and honestly, it felt perfect. It felt like this was how it was always supposed to be. My mom's been my rock through everything, and having her there, supporting me as I started this new chapter with Mike, just felt right. And Mike, I can't even explain how I felt when I saw him standing there, waiting for me. All the nerves disappeared the moment we locked eyes. I knew in that moment that this was all that mattered. My dad wasn't there, but that didn't matter. The people who did care, who'd always cared, were there, and that's what counted. The whole day went by in a blur. I remember little moments. Claire fixing my dress, my mom tearing up during the vows, Mike squeezing my hand when I was nervous. But most of it just felt like a whirlwind of happiness. I wasn't focused on James, or what could have been, or any of the past drama. For once, I was fully present in the moment, and it was amazing. Later that night during the reception, Claire pulled me aside. She was smiling, but there was this look in her eyes that told me she had something on her mind. "So," she said, "Dad called me." Just hearing that was enough to make my stomach flip a little, but I was curious. I hadn't spoken to him in months, and now, on my wedding day, he decides to reach out. Claire told me that James had called her that morning, asking how I was and if I was nervous. He didn't ask to come or try to force his way into the day, but he did ask if I was happy. I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me was still angry, of course. How could I not be after everything? But another part of me appreciated that he didn't try to make the day about him. It felt odd, but also kind of peaceful. Claire said he sounded different, like he regretted things but didn't know how to fix them. She told him I was doing great and that the wedding was beautiful, and apparently he just said, "That's good. Tell her I'm proud of her." Now I know that's not the grand gesture or apology I had been wanting for so long, but hearing that he was proud of me, even if it was through Claire, hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. It didn't make up for everything, and it didn't change the fact that he wasn't in my life, but it was something. I guess I had to take it for what it was. I didn't call him back. I didn't feel the need to. This day wasn't about him, and I wasn't going to let his random burst of guilt or whatever it was overshadow everything. But weirdly enough, hearing that he was proud of me gave me a little closure. It didn't fix anything, but it felt like the last piece of a puzzle I'd been working on my whole life. By the end of the night, As Mike and I danced our first dance as husband and wife, I felt this overwhelming sense of peace. My dad had made his choices, and I'd made mine. I didn't need his approval or his involvement to be happy. I had everything I needed right in front of me, my husband, my family, and the people who loved me. And that was more than enough. Update 4. After the wedding, life sort of settled into a new rhythm. It was like this huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was finally married to Mike, and everything felt right. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about my dad every day. I wasn't replaying the past or wondering if I'd made the right decision about cutting him out of my life. I was just living, and honestly, it felt great. A few weeks after the wedding, Claire and I were hanging out. We hadn't really talked much about the wedding since that day, mostly because there wasn't much more to say. But while we were sitting around catching up on work stuff and life, she brought up Dad again. It wasn't anything big, just a passing comment about how she hadn't heard from him in a while either. I could tell she was still struggling with the whole situation. She wasn't ready to cut him off completely like I had, but she also wasn't trying too hard to keep him in her life. She was in this weird limbo, and I felt for her. "Do you think he'll ever really reach out?" Claire asked, looking kind of lost in thought. It was the first time in a while I'd really seen her get emotional about it. I thought about it for a second before answering. Honestly, I don't know. I used to think he would, but now, I'm not so sure. I wasn't trying to sound harsh, but it was the truth. After everything that had happened, I wasn't holding my breath for some grand gesture from James. It wasn't that I didn't care anymore. It's just that I had accepted that he wasn't going to be the father I'd always wanted. Claire sighed and nodded, like she understood but wasn't ready to admit it herself. We didn't dwell on it, though. We spent the rest of the afternoon laughing and talking about our mom's latest attempt at cooking, which was always a disaster. By the time Claire left, I was back in that good headspace, the one where I wasn't thinking about my dad. But, as life always seems to go, the peace didn't last long. A couple of months after that conversation with Claire, I got an unexpected phone call. It was from my aunt, my dad's sister. We hadn't really been in touch much since the whole thing with my dad started, but I guess she'd heard about the wedding and everything that had happened. Her voice was calm, but there was this undertone that made me nervous right away. "I've been meaning to talk to you about James," she said, and my stomach dropped. I didn't even want to hear whatever she was about to say, but at the same time, I knew I had to listen. She went on to explain that my dad had been going through some stuff. Apparently, he'd been dealing with health problems, and it wasn't looking great. She didn't get into specifics, but the way she talked about it made it clear that this wasn't just some minor issue. I didn't know what to feel. I mean, on one hand, he's still my dad. No matter how much he's hurt me, no matter how many times he's let me down, hearing that he was sick hit me harder than I thought it would. But on the other hand, there was this anger inside me that hadn't gone away. It's like, now that he's sick, am I supposed to just forget everything? Am I supposed to run back to him and pretend like nothing ever happened? I wasn't sure I could do that. I thanked my aunt for letting me know and told her I needed time to think. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, just staring at my phone, feeling torn. Part of me wanted to reach out, to see how bad things really were, but the other part of me, the part that had spent years being hurt by him, was telling me to stay away. I called Claire, of course. I needed to talk it through with her. She was quiet for a while after I told her the news, and then she said something that really stuck with me. "You don't have to decide anything right now, Em. It's okay to take your time." That was the thing, though. How much time could I really take? What if I waited too long and then it was too late? What if I never got the chance to say the things I needed to say? But then again, did I even want to say anything at all? It felt like I was stuck in this emotional tug-of-war, and I didn't know which side to pick. Over the next few days, I went back and forth in my head. I tried to focus on work, on Mike, on the future we were building together, but my mind kept drifting back to my dad. I found myself wondering if this was some kind of cosmic chance to fix things, to say goodbye properly. Or maybe it was just life throwing another curve my way, testing me to see if I'd fall back into old patterns. Finally, after what felt like forever, I made a decision. I wasn't going to reach out, at least not right away. If my dad wanted to talk, if he really wanted to mend things, he could reach out to me. I wasn't going to be the one chasing him down again. I'd spent too much of my life doing that already, and I wasn't going to put myself through it anymore. And so I waited. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and still nothing. No phone call, no message, no sign that he even wanted to fix things. I guess that was my answer. In the end, I realized something important. closure doesn't always come from the other person. Sometimes you have to give it to yourself. My dad wasn't going to give me the apology I wanted, and he wasn't going to become the father I needed. And that's okay. I'd made my peace with it, and I didn't need him to validate my feelings or my decisions. Life kept moving forward, like it always does. Mike and I were building our life together, and I was happy, truly happy. My relationship with Claire was stronger than ever, and my mom was still being her chaotic, wonderful self. And that was enough. It had to be. As for my dad, I don't know. Maybe one day I'll hear from him again. Maybe I won't. But either way, I know I'll be okay. I don't need his approval anymore. I don't need his presence to feel complete. I've got everything I need right here, with the people who've always been there for me. And that, for me, was the real closure.
Layla gripped the steering wheel tightly, her breath catching as the officer's voice rang out through her car window. "Step out of the vehicle," he demanded, his tone as sharp as the glare of the patrol car's flashing lights behind her. Her heart pounded against her chest. How could she explain that she physically couldn't comply? The air inside the car felt suffocating as panic started to take hold. The day had started so peacefully, with Layla savoring her morning coffee and a quiet sense of accomplishment as she prepared for a simple meetup with friends. Driving had become a symbol of her independence, a victory over the accident that had changed her life forever. But now, parked on the side of the road, her sanctuary was under siege. The officer's towering presence outside her window shattered her sense of safety. This wasn't just a routine stop, it was a confrontation with assumptions, power, and prejudice. As the officer leaned closer, his words cutting like a blade, Layla's resolve stiffened. She wasn't just a disabled woman trapped in a car, she was a fighter who had rebuilt her life brick by brick. What happened next, however, would leave both of them, and everyone watching, forever changed. Welcome to Real Life Stories New, where narratives like these challenge your perspective and uncover the resilience of the human spirit. Watch as Layla's courage takes center stage in a battle that is far more than a traffic stop. Will she rise against the odds, or will this day rewrite her journey forever? Layla's hands trembled on the steering wheel, her mind racing as the officer's voice echoed in her ears. "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated, his tone cold and unyielding. She glanced at her prosthetic legs, an unspoken reminder of her reality, and took a steadying breath. This wasn't just fear. It was humiliation, bubbling beneath the surface and threatening to spill over. "Officer, I physically can't step out," she said, her voice calm but firm. Her stomach tightened as she searched his face for any sign of understanding, but his expression remained stony. Instead, he leaned closer, his shadow darkening the interior of her car. "I said get out," he barked, his hand brushing the edge of the door handle. Layla's chest tightened. She felt cornered, every inch of her autonomy slipping away under his oppressive gaze. The vulnerability she fought so hard to conceal was now laid bare. Would this man even care if she told him about the years of grit and resilience it took to regain her independence? "I can't comply with your orders," she repeated, her voice shaking now but resolute. "I don't have the ability to stand." Her words hung in the air, fragile yet defiant. For a moment, she thought she saw hesitation flicker in his eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Without another word, he yanked the door open, the sound of the latch releasing like a gunshot in her ears. Before she could process what was happening, his hand clamped around her arm, and he began pulling her forward. "Let me go," Layla cried, her voice breaking as panic set in. Her prosthetics shifted awkwardly, one twisting out of place, the metal frame clattering against the pavement. The sound was deafening, a cruel reminder of her reality. Around them, murmurs began to ripple through a growing crowd. "She can't even walk," someone shouted, their voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. Layla's breath hitched as she caught sight of people raising their phones, cameras trained on the unfolding scene. It was no longer just her fight. Strangers now bore witness to her struggle, and their presence brought a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. The officer's grip tightened, his frustration boiling over. You think you're above the law? He hissed, his voice dripping with disdain. I don't care what excuses you have. Get out now, or I'll assist you further. Her mind raced. She could either give in, let herself be dragged completely into his control, or she could resist, not physically, but through the only weapon she had left, her voice. I told you, I can't, she shouted, her desperation echoing louder now. The sting of tears blurred her vision, but she refused to break. What you're doing is wrong. And you will be held accountable. His hand hovered near his holster, his posture taut and threatening. Layla's pulse quickened as the officer made his intentions clear. This wasn't just about compliance anymore, it was about dominance, about stripping her of her dignity. And then, just as the situation threatened to spiral further out of control, a new voice broke through the tension. Step back. The younger officer's tone was commanding, yet measured. Derek, she thought his name was. He moved toward them, his tall frame intercepting the escalating scene. You're escalating a situation that doesn't need to be. Let her go. The first officer turned sharply, his face twisting with indignation. This is none of your business, he spat. She's resisting, and I'm handling it. She's not resisting, Derek countered, his voice calm but firm. He gestured toward the crowd. And you're not just handling this anymore. The whole world is watching. The tension between the two men crackled like electricity. Layla could only watch, her breaths shallow, as Derek subtly positioned himself closer to her, his body language protective. You need to step down, now, Derek said, his tone leaving no room for argument. For the first time, the first officer faltered, his eyes darting toward the phones held aloft by the crowd. His face hardened as he turned his glare back toward Layla. This isn't over, he muttered, venom dripping from his words. But he released her arm, stepping away as Derek stood his ground. Layla's entire body felt like it was vibrating with adrenaline. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. As Derek turned to her, his expression softened, though there was a quiet fire in his eyes. Are you okay? He asked, his voice low, almost gentle. Layla swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. I'm not hurt, she said, her voice trembling, but I'm not okay with what just happened. Derek nodded, his jaw tightening. And you shouldn't be. None of this was right. Around them, the crowd murmured in support, their voices blending into a wave of solidarity. For the first time since the ordeal began, Layla felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected, hope. As sirens blared in the distance, signaling the arrival of more officers, she looked Derek in the eyes and said with quiet determination, this isn't just about me. This has to stop. I know, he replied, his gaze steady. And I'm going to help make sure it does. For the first time, Layla felt like she wasn't fighting alone. Layla stood outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the pavement. She glanced at the crowd gathered around her, their cheers and signs a stark contrast to the tension that had gripped her only hours ago. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of closure, not because everything was resolved, but because she had faced her fears and spoken her truth. Inside the courtroom, she had found her voice. It wasn't just about her story but about the broader fight for dignity and justice. The moment she looked into the eyes of those who came to support her, Derek, Vanessa, strangers who believed in her cause, she realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was standing tall, even if not on her own legs, and that made all the difference. Layla took a deep breath, her prosthetic legs steady beneath her as she wheeled herself through the sea of supporters. Her determination had grown into something greater, a commitment to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. She was no longer just a victim, she was a symbol of resilience, a voice for change. As the crowd began to disperse, a young girl in a wheelchair rolled up to Layla. You're so brave, she said softly, her eyes wide with admiration. Layla smiled, her heart swelling. And so are you, she replied, reaching out to take the girl's hand. Moments like this reminded her why the fight mattered. It wasn't just for justice but for hope, for a world where no one felt invisible or powerless. If this story moved you, please like, share, and help Real Life Stories New reach 10,000 subscribers. Together, we can shine a light on stories that inspire and change lives.